All right. Well, welcome to the traffic calming meeting for Young's Lane. My name is David Greaves. I work with NDOT on the traffic calming program. So I'll be designing this project as well as facilitating this meeting. We are meeting virtually via WebEx, and today is December 4th, 2024, meeting at 6 p.m. We're going to start the meeting with an overview of the traffic calming program in general before we move on to some of the tools in our toolbox, and then ultimately the design itself and some kind of next steps and process conversations. So to answer the question, what is traffic calming? The neighborhood street traffic calming program focuses on residential streets by implementing physical solutions to encourage lower speeds over significant lengths. Generally, what that means is we don't find a lot of projects in like heavily commercial or industrial neighborhoods. We don't do projects like one block at a time. We usually like to choose an entire street or a significant segment of a street for a traffic calming project. And ultimately, the primary goal is speed reduction. And we'll talk about why that's so important to the program in just a second. There are 3 E's of traffic calming: education, enforcement, and engineering. Now, we've got engineering bold and underlined here because that's the piece of this that NDOT has the greatest ability to directly affect. Um, Generally, we try to educate wherever we can. Certainly, this meeting is an example of educating folks about speeding and driving safely. Enforcement is in the realm of Metro Nashville Police Department, so they're able to write tickets and enforce speeds that way. NDOT is not able to do that. So what we like to do is come up with an engineered design that will hopefully enforce speeds at all times without the need for you know police being present to achieve lower speeds and without the need for everyone to have been educated on speeding. The reason that speed reduction is an important goal of the traffic calming program ties back to safety and Vision Zero. So Vision Zero is a safety initiative and really represents a strategy to achieve 0 deaths or serious injuries on Nashville's public roadways. Where that ties into traffic calming and speeds is demonstrated by the infographic below. So we can see that a pedestrian struck by a vehicle going 25 miles an hour has a pretty good chance of survival. That's about 89%. Unfortunately, that probability of surviving starts to go way down as the vehicle speed climbs up. So in that 35 mile an hour or even 45 mile an hour range, we do not expect traffic incidents like that to result in a person surviving, which certainly we don't want. So basically what that means is when we see a street that does see significant speeding on it in neighborhoods where people might want to be walking or biking, that indicates to us that some solution is needed to achieve a safer environment for everyone to live in. This is a really popular program in Nashville. As of August 2024, when Young's Lane was selected, there were about 575 neighborhood streets in the queue. So that means they've applied for traffic calming, had data collected, but not yet been selected to have a project implemented. In the fall of 2024, we selected 25 neighborhood streets. We try to do that every 6 months to keep the program moving and install as much traffic calming as we can while we know the need is quite significant in Nashville. We're sort of chipping away at it as we can. Off to the right, you'll see a map of Davidson County, city of Nashville. This is a graphic of where all of these projects are located. We'll get to a link at the end of the presentation that will bring you to the website where this map is hosted. But But basically every one of those lines is its own traffic calming project in some phase or another. So before we get to the designs and tools, there are a few things that the traffic calming program is able to do as part of projects like these, but there's a lot of things that are covered by other corners of NDOT or different departments in Nashville in general. So should we encounter anything that we're not necessarily able to address with this project, we want to make sure everyone is aware that Hub Nashville is a resource that people can use to request all kinds of things from Metro. I typically use it for things like potholes or debris in the road. There are public safety options on there. Really anything that you might interact with Metro Nashville about can probably be found on Hub. So we just want to make sure everyone's aware of that as a resource in addition to meetings like these. So a little bit about how Young's Lane was selected for traffic calming is on this slide here. So the pie chart to the right essentially is a breakdown of the scoring system we use to rank all of those 575 applications in order of most in need of traffic calming to least in need. So that score is made up of 5 factors. That's vehicular speeds and volumes. Those two together kind of represent the danger that speeding vehicles create. So certainly more vehicles are likely to cause accidents, and then the faster cars are going, that of course is dangerous as well. We also consider crash history. So if there have been any vulnerable user injuries or fatalities, that'll be a significant boost to a street score. And then we also like to look at non-driver accommodations. That's basically asking, are there sidewalks or aren't there? If you don't have sidewalks, we know that pedestrians will be sharing the pavement with vehicles. And in those instances, we want to make sure we account for that in our selection process. And then that last 5% is trip destinations. That's basically asking if there are schools or parks or libraries nearby, land uses that we know generate pedestrian trips more than, say, like industrial land uses, for instance. So when we collected all of that data in the prioritization process and added them all up, that is how Young's Lane wound up in the top of that list in that first 25 streets that were selected. So some of that data specifically for Young's Lane that we collected for that prioritization process was an 85th% speed of 37 miles an hour. What that means is 85% of the vehicles that were measured were driving 37 miles an hour or below. And then 15% of vehicles were actually driving faster than that. So it's not quite an average necessarily. It's more like a median, but shifted up to that 85th percentile. You had a volume of 733 vehicles per day. Relative to most streets in the traffic calming program, that's not super high, but it is a street that doesn't have a lot of residences on it relative to other ones. So it is kind of high for a street like Young's Lane. And then it is a narrow street with a width of 20 feet. And that basically is the bare minimum that we like to build roads with. Essentially what it means is you have 2 10-foot wide lanes and not much else. We'll kind of dig into how that affects the options we have for Young's Lane while we talk about the tools. And then lastly, this is a map of the project. So I don't know if this segment right here is still Young's Lane or it might be Alice Street, but essentially what was applied for was this whole length, basically just calming anything that may be parallel to this West Trinity Lane is the project. So it starts over on West Trinity and then extends all the way over to what I think is White's Creek Pike over here. So next we're going to talk about the toolkit, but before I do, I want to just quickly pause and see, are there any questions from the folks on the phone about anything we've covered so far? Sounds like we can go ahead and move on. But just so everyone's aware, we have a chat feature open. You're welcome to throw questions in there as they come up. We've also got a pretty small group, so I won't mind if y'all come off mute and just kind of speak up if necessary. That would be totally fine. But moving on to the program's toolkit, the tool that NDOT uses most often in the traffic calming program are speed cushions. So what these are modular rubber devices. That means they're prefabricated in a factory and then essentially assembled on site, but not like cast in place like an asphalt or a concrete device might be. They work kind of like speed bumps. They do deflect cars and trucks vertically, but they're stretched way out so that a higher target speed can be achieved. And what I mean by that is if you think about a traditional speed bump like you might find in a grocery store parking lot, those are about 2 feet long, maybe even shorter, and between 3 and 4 inches tall. Those are seeking to slow vehicles down to about 5 miles an hour, kind of how you might want to be driving in an area that has a lot of people walking around like a parking lot. We do not want these to have those results. We're basically seeking for vehicles to drive between 20 and 25 miles an hour as they traverse these. So that's why those are stretched way out like that to lengths of 7, 10.5, or 14 feet. They do have gaps in between them. That's a deliberate design feature intended to reduce the impact to emergency response vehicles. Basically, how that works is vehicles like fire trucks that have wider wheelbases are able to more smoothly roll over these by kind of grazing the sides and not going all the way up and over the top. Smaller vehicles with narrower wheelbases will be, affected as intended. But we don't want to install devices like these and like seriously inhibit emergency vehicles from responding to emergencies. Related to speed cushions are speed tables. You may notice these are made out of the exact same material. So all those pieces are the same. It's really just a question of configuration. We don't do these as often, but we do them sometimes. So some situations where speed tables might be appropriate is on maybe like a cul-de-sac style neighborhood that's not going to see a lot of emergency vehicles using it as like a through route. Or perhaps in instances when a width of a road is kind of awkward and we're not really able to fit an ideal amount of cushions on the roadway. You'll see these around Nashville sometimes, but somewhat sparingly. So I mentioned that vertical measures are NDOT's kind of preferred method for traffic calming. And the reason for that is we've observed that they work really well for the program's goals. Basically, what we see on the screen here are the results of a study that NDOT conducted of 6 projects before and after the traffic calming installation. So those 6 averaged together showed an average speed coming down from 31 miles an hour to 22, and an 85th percent speed coming down from 37 miles an hour all the way down to 25. So if you remember earlier in the presentation, Young's Lane had an 85th speed of 37 miles an hour. So should a project like this be installed with vertical measures, we might expect results around 25 miles an hour if all goes well. There are plenty of instances where vertical measures are not the right solution. On really steep grades and roads that are especially curvy with kind of limited sight distances, they can sometimes surprise vehicles, which is not what we want. So in instances where we're kind of constrained and not able to do as many vertical measures as we'd like, we can implement a few other tools to sort of supplement those countermeasures to add up to an effect that we're happy with. One of these tools is called radar feedback signs. Basically, these are solar-powered devices that read a speed as they approach the sign and show it back to the driver. So if you're driving at or around the speed limit, it'll just show it to you in those yellow letters. If you were driving really fast over the speed limit, I think it would turn red at maybe and just kind of like highlight that to indicate, hey, you're going, 40 in this 25-mile-an-hour zone. And that's intended to serve as just kind of a reminder of how fast people are going. And that alone does have an average reduction of 6 to 7 miles an hour. But they don't physically affect the vehicles. So if somebody, really didn't mind that they were speeding, this would not be able to like take their photo or write them a ticket, anything like that. It's not an enforcement device, more just like a reminding that this is what the speed limit is and this is how fast you're going. And we can also do something called pavement narrowing. This is really for streets that have excess asphalt. So if the street was really wide and it didn't need to be that large, narrowing a road like we see on the screen can sort of psychologically make a road feel a little more claustrophobic and induce lower speeds that way. It's not something we're going to be able to do on Young's Lane because you really just have only enough asphalt for those 2 lanes. So narrower than that isn't really somewhere we're able to go. Something that works similar to narrowing but applied to large intersections are called bulb outs. And what these are essentially is narrowing the roadway in such a way that the turning radii is shorter. So basically, we see intersections with large sweeping curves have vehicles traverse them at higher speeds. And that can be a problem if there are pedestrians either crossing the street or on the side. It gives vehicles less time to notice them and yield to pedestrians. So when we see excessively large intersections like the one in the top right, we can shrink it with the use of paint and delineators and hopefully slow vehicles down to an appropriate speed as they use the intersection. There are also some other benefits in neighborhoods that see a lot of on-street parking to the point where vehicles are parking close enough to intersections that they actually obstruct the view between a moving car and a pedestrian in the crosswalk. They can help enforce existing parking regulations by basically just clearing out those sight lines and making sure everyone is able to see each other as they share the roadways. On wide roads, we can do something called chicanes. This works really well when we have a wide section and generally a straight kind of street. And basically, that format is easy to speed on. It's essentially like a runway of sorts. And when we do chicanes, we take the center line and zigzag it back and forth. That forces vehicles to kind of maneuver their way as they go along the street, and it makes it much more difficult to drive really fast. Lastly, we have something called traffic circles. These work similar to bulb outs, but narrowing the road, the intersection from the inside out rather than the outside in. The downside of these is they take a lot of space in the intersection to work properly. So on smaller, narrower roadways, it's much harder to find the space necessary to put an effective traffic circle in. So now we can move on to checking out the concept design for Young's Lane. Essentially what we're proposing is a series of speed cushions starting at the beginning of the street and extending all the way over to the end of the street. We tried to space these out as evenly as we could, but essentially we ran into a lot of places that had steep hills in kind of awkward places. We also design around driveways, so we don't want to place these in front of anyone's driveway such that it would obstruct them from turning in and out. So with the constraints that we had, this was kind of the best design that we thought we could feasibly do. Now, I will say, before this design is finalized, we're going to go and visit Young's Lane in person, and take grade measurements at each of these locations and just really verify that we're not kind of coloring outside the lines with a project like this. So for the most part, these are spaced between 400 and 500 feet apart from each other. But at those steep hills, essentially the best we can do is cushions at the top and cushions at the bottom. We do expect, though, that a series of cushions like this will both encourage lower speeds throughout the entire street, um, as well as just make it kind of a calmer environment in general. So before I move on, I want to just make sure everyone is, able to comment or ask questions. I know we've covered a lot so far. Really, all we have left is kind of how the voting works and the next steps of the project. But we're here to collect feedback from all of you because we know that you have insights onto what's going on Young's Lane that we don't know about. So if there is anything that you'd like us to know about before we go out and do our site visit, we certainly want to hear it.
So, question about the number of speed cushions. I've never seen this many on one street. Just wondering how you decided like what should go, how many should be on the street.
Yeah, that's a great question. So on a typical street, we like to space cushions between 300 and 500 feet apart. Essentially, that spacing is the sweet spot of providing enough calming that the effects are achieved, but not leaving so much space that vehicles who are in a hurry have the opportunity to get back up to dangerous speeds. So what we've observed in neighborhoods where cushions aren't spaced close enough is vehicles that still do want to get where they're going faster than may be appropriate to that street. They'll actually speed up more to kind of make up for lost time. And that's an effect that we want to avoid if at all possible. I do hear you that this looks like a lot in a row, and 11 is more than we do on most projects. But basically, that comes down to how long a street is, and really nothing else. So Young's Lane of the traffic calming projects is one of the longer ones that we see in a program like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyone else? All right. Well, we can certainly circle back to this if necessary. I'll move on for now to this flow chart that shows the program process. So as we recall, we started this project with an application. We then received that application, did that data collection process and scoring. We're now here in the red circle at the neighborhood meeting. This is where we advertised through mailers, gave an overview of the program toolbox, the concept, and everything we've covered so far. Like I mentioned, the next step is for us to do a site visit, field review, and then kind of refine the concept based on both the findings of that visit as well as the feedback we collect tonight. After that, we're going to produce the construction plans. So that looks like this, but you'll see more specific locations for each of these cushions. We'll also kind of show what that cross section is going to look like. So exactly where along the width of the road those cushions go, as well as some signage information for the contractor to use while they go out and install this. Once that design is done, we can do kind of one of two things. We can schedule the second neighborhood meeting where we basically present those construction plans, do a recap of the toolbox and the process. The other option is for us to post the plans online and go directly to the balloting process. That's usually something we do if there isn't a lot of follow-up necessary after the first meeting, or perhaps the design really isn't expected to change much from the concept to the construction plans. But basically what that entails is getting a ballot mailer in the mail. It'll have a link to the plans that are posted online, so everyone is able to view them before voting yes or no. And then if there are 66% or more votes that are in favor of the project, it will go to the construction queue. Um, Typically, that is between 8 and 10 months from the approval of a project to completion of construction. That is a pretty big range and a pretty long timeline. That's mainly due to the backlog of projects that we're currently building. They don't take very long to build individually. A little bit about that ballot. So this is what the postcard is going to look like up in the top left corner of the screen here. So like I mentioned, it's got a QR code and a URL that will direct anyone who receives it to the website. It's also got the phone number of the NDOT project manager. So if anyone would prefer to vote by phone rather than online, they're more than welcome to do so. That's totally fine. The ballot period is going to be open for 6 weeks. So we chose that because we want there to be plenty of time for people to receive the ballots, maybe talk to their neighbors, make sure they're aware of the project. But we also don't want it open for months and months and drag a project like this out because it is addressing a safety concern that we have. And then, like I mentioned, the threshold for passing is 66% of respondents voting yes. So that doesn't mean 66% of all of those properties. It's just of those who voted. If 2/3 are in favor, then the project will move forward. I do want to make sure we are aware of the eligibility for these ballots. Basically, we use Metro Planning's mailing tool to find all of the properties that abut the affected right-of-way, and then contact the owner listed on the Register of Deeds records. So we can see that there are a few parcels that are like owned in common by a number of condos. Everyone who is within that will get a ballot. We also send ballots to churches and schools. So it looks like we've got a couple schools and maybe a church or two along Young's Lane. They'll each get one vote. And then if anyone owns like multiple properties, we don't send them multiple ballots. We'll just send them the one. And then vacant properties. So if there are like no buildings or anything on it, we'll go ahead and exclude them just because we know that no one is even living there. And then businesses are not eligible. Usually we find those kind of on the corners of streets on like the larger roads. Basically, we're concerned about the neighborhood pedestrian experience. So we're kind of looking for those residential constituent opinions. That is all I've got, but I know we just covered a lot of information. So we can take as much time for questions as we need. This is my contact information as well. So if anyone is viewing this on YouTube after tonight, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I will ask that you also copy NDOT TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. That keeps all the appropriate people at NDOT in the loop as well, so that we can kind of work on this as a team. But with that, is there any questions from those who've joined us?
Question regarding the ballot. So there is a development at the intersection of Young's Lane and West Trinity Lane that is mostly Airbnbs. So
Yes.
some of the owners are listed as LLCs. One, would an LLC receive a ballot? And then two, if the owner is not in Tennessee, would that owner still get a ballot?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. So we don't typically exclude LLCs or trusts or any of those entities, just because it's really hard for us to determine if it's an Airbnb or if it is just like, maybe a husband and wife set up some kind of entity for their own house ownership. So we don't consider that like an operating business. Um, and yes, as long as they own the parcel, we'll send them a mailer. Um, I will say I don't believe we get a lot of out of state owners like engaging with projects like these. Um, so in reality, we don't see a lot of out of state voting, but we do send them the postcards the same as everyone else.
That makes sense because I was thinking that they probably wouldn't respond. So that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, before we sign off for the night, I do want to get your take on which of those two approaches we want to take for moving forward. Um, if you all would like to have a second meeting, we're more than happy to do so. But we also know that that takes time out of your evenings and adds a little bit of duration to the project. But what do you all think? We're happy to go either way.
I think it would be best to go straight to the ballot. I mean, the design is pretty simple. It's, speed cushions along the length of the road. Um, so I think going straight to the ballot would be best, particularly too with the 8 to 10 month backlog. I've seen several other projects where they're still waiting and it's way past 10 months. Um, so yeah, so just not wanting to, I won't say waste time, but trying to save time and just go straight to the ballot.
Understood. Yeah, that sounds great. We'll plan on that. Well, if we don't have any more questions or comments, just want to make sure everyone is aware of TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. That's a website with a lot more information about the program than we covered tonight. NDOT's also got some social media presence they like people to know about. But if there's nothing else, thank you all so much for joining this evening. It was, great being here to talk to you, and we're excited to get this project moving along.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
All right, y'all have a good night.